Welcome to the Conflict 101 module. I am Annie Del Busto Cohen. I use she, her pronouns, and I work in the Wardle Center for Leadership. And my amazing co-facilitator is...
Hello, everyone. I'm Stacy Steinbach. I use she, her pronouns. I am the Assistant Director for Residential Leadership, and I'm excited to be co-presenting this with my fabulous colleague, Annie.
Yay! So we are going to share the screen and walk you through a presentation, and there will be resources in Moodle that you'll be able to click on. You'll also have the PowerPoint to be able to refer to as well as this video. So here we go. Alrighty.
All right. So in this module, we will touch on what is conflict, how this impacts your identity and relationships, how your identity and relationships impact conflict, and then what as student leaders that you can do when conflict arises in your organization, in your house, even in life. Hopefully you'll get some good tips on how to look at conflict and see it as something that's positive. So you mean conflict isn't something to avoid? Again, we're going to help you see conflict as something that is positive. So go head on into that conflict, and we're going to help you figure out how to do that. Take a look at this video, and then we'll talk a little bit about it.
Okay. Oops.
What is all this? You keep secrets from your own family?
It's all that time he spends in the plaza.
Dios, he's captain crazy. And it's not a fantasy. That man was Ernesto de la Cruz, the greatest musician of all time.
We've never known anything about this man. But whoever he was, he still abandoned his family. This is no future for my son.
Oh, Papa, you said my family would guide me. Well, de la Cruz is my family. I'm supposed to play music. Never. That man's music was a curse. I will not allow it. If you would just...
Yeah. You will listen to your family. No more music.
Just listen to me play.
End of argument.
You want to end up like that man? Forgotten? Left off your family. So, ofrenda. I don't care if I'm on some stupid ofrenda. No!
Mama!
No guitar. No music. Oh, come. You'll feel better after you eat with your family.
Miguel! Miguel!
There was so much conflict in that 1-minute clip that we want you to think about and hope that nothing escalates to that in your group. So be it in an org, be it in a house, be it on a team, that we want to make sure that your conflict doesn't get to that point. So how and why it happens: lack of clear communication, body language, unconscious bias, being a bystander, lack of trust. So all of these things tell us why conflict happens. And if you think about the video you just saw, there was lots of these things going on, right? There was definitely, if you saw people's body language, you saw that there were people standing by, not doing anything. And clearly there was lost trust as well.
Stacey, can I jump in?
Yeah, please do.
So I think one of the things is that, you know, conflicts, so that was a particular example of a conflict with a family. And so there's a lot of relationship there, right? And one of the things was that the communication broke down because people wouldn't listen to each other. They didn't want to give the space. They didn't want to honor the other person. And so when you're thinking about how you approach and or embrace conflict, think about how you're valuing the relationship part of that too. And that some conflicts are going to feel scarier than others because of how the relationship is. So for example, if I'm in a conflict with Stacy, not only are we colleagues, but we're also really good friends. And so I'm going to put more energy into wanting to resolve and work through the conflict because I care about Stacy and
Mm-hmm.
value that relationship. And
Mhm.
so those will vary across your teams. You might know some people in your teams for longer than others, but think about when you're approaching conflict, it's easy to just ignore it and run away. But if you care about the relationship, you care about the person you're in the conflict with, you're more likely to feel amped up and also more investment in it.
Mhm. And it's scarier and harder sometimes when you really care about the person, because it could mean, like, if I disagree with you about something that maybe is connected to a value, or something that you believe in, that could impact our relationship. So it's how do you navigate those things as well, which is often tricky and hard.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So now we found this really exciting conflict styles management assessment, which Annie's going to bring up now so we can take a look at it. And we're going to have you take this assessment. So basically you go through and you indicate always, very often, sometimes not very often, rarely, if these things pertain to you. So you can either, if you're able to print it out. If not, you'll see on the next page maybe, there's a little key that you'll be able to put, interesting. A key, click on the other tab, maybe it's on that one. There should be a little key that, yeah, it says it's 4 pages.
Let's see. Ah, yes.
There it is. So see, there's this little key that you can put down and what you've got for each question. And then that tells you what style of conflict management you best connect with. And then we'll talk a little bit more about that. So like I said, you can either print it if you have access to a printer, and if not, no worries, just jot it down on a piece of paper. And like Annie said before, this is something that will be both accessible through Moodle as well as through the PowerPoint link itself too. We thought this one was kind of neat because then you can do a little bit more with it, because you can be a compromising fox or a collaborating owl, or I think there's a shark, accommodating teddy bear, which I think when I took this, I think I'm kind of in that a little bit there. And so, yeah, it's something that you can then use even with your or houses or teams, just to see how you all relate with each other too. So if you want to pause the video here, take the conflict management assessment, and then figure out what your dominant and backup styles are, and think through these questions. What if this resonates with you? What if this is surprising to you? What, if anything, does this make you realize you need from others? And how do you want to communicate your style with others in your group? And I think that piece is really important for folks to understand where you're coming from, particularly if you are leading a group of people, for them to understand how you best deal with conflict to then help move the group forward. And like I said, this could also be a useful tool to use with other folks in the group that you're leading as well, so you know how each other handles conflict when they inevitably will arise.
Absolutely. I think this is one of those things, like Stacey was just saying, is that if you have a retreat early on, or a meeting where you're establishing like who you are as a group, this is something that's really good and useful to do early on so that you can anticipate stuff ahead of time. The other thing we'd encourage you to do is try not to make any kind of judgment about whatever your assessment tells you. Again, it's an assessment, it's a tool. It doesn't predict everything, but what's really important is that sometimes we judge the way that we approach conflict, or we judge the way that other people approach conflict. And we have to be aware that we're all going to bring in our own stuff. So when you're doing it, try and just like keep a neutral or multi-partial perspective, that this is just something that's giving you a little bit more information about yourself or helping you to identify it.
And if you'll look, they describe each of the different styles, and they all have positive attributes. There are some things that like this could be challenging, but they all have positive attributes. So like Annie said, it's really important to think about like what is positive about this conflict management style.
One of the other things too that we're not going to get into so much, but if you happen to do with your group the Strengths Finder, I think, so Stacy was joking about being the accommodating teddy bear, but empathy is I think still your top strength, right?
Yes, it is. Yep.
Do you have harmony in your strengths as well?
I don't.
Okay. So, I mean, empathy is one of those things where like, that's going to influence, her strengths are going to impact also how she approaches conflict.
Yep, absolutely.
All right. So let's go back to presenting. All right. So this part about conflict is that we want you to be thinking about, which this is a good segue from taking the assessment into thinking about who am I and how do I show up in relationship to others, and who are the other people that are in relationship to me, and how do they show up. So part of it, something that's going to permeate the culture environment of your group, is that we all hold multiple different identities. Some identities that get privilege, some that are dominant, some that are subordinated. You can also refer to the other module on leading in a diverse community around this to get a little bit more context. But we're referencing identities because who we are and how we've been socialized or what we've learned about how to interact with others from our families, from all of our life up to Smith, impacts how you approach conflict and relationship building when you're in relation to others in teams or groups or staffs or things like that. So I would say an example of that is there was a lot of conflict in my house growing up, and it wasn't always productive or healthy conflict. So I internalized being a mediator. I also internalized being really sensitive to conflict. So as an adult, I can feel that in my body before I even know, maybe consciously or intellectually, what's happening. Like Stacy, I'm also an empath. So even if I'm not part of a conflict, if I'm in a group where other people are, I can sense it right away. So that's one of the things that's important for my team members to know about me, is that I'm really sensitive to those dynamics. And something that's important is, how do we call it out, or how do we move through it for me? And that's because that's how I was socialized around conflict. And some of that work you can undo as you get older. Some of that work you just address, right? So we're wanting you to create some norms and culture around how you all show up in a space and how you want to respect and hold one another, because inevitably conflict will occur, and we want you to embrace it, not to shy away from it, because conflict can be really productive in helping your team evolve. So using this chart to think a little bit about, what has your group done to establish relationships and culture with one another? So if you don't do a retreat, or you don't do a meeting where you're getting to learn about each other in the beginning, and you just dive into work, you're not going to have a sense of how one another works together. This is another place where you can refer to the Team Toolkit module, where it also gives you different types of activities and exercises to think about how you want to cultivate that culture. What are the group norms you've created? How do you consider roles and relationships in how you build culture? And so one of the things that really points to is that if you have a hierarchy in your group, sometimes people may not feel empowered to be able to challenge each other based on the leadership or based on the structure of your group. So even having a hierarchy is just fine, but if you establish norms about, like, as the president of our organization, I want to make sure that you feel really comfortable giving me feedback, and this is the mechanism in which to do it, then it starts to flatten some of the power dynamics and let somebody else know who's maybe has a role in the organization that doesn't feel like they have as much power as the president to be able to still engage with them.
Mhm.
And what are the possible dynamics you foresee happening in your group? So dynamics can be people that have been, maybe they're seniors, and most of your group is made up of seniors, and you are brand new to the group and you're a first year or sophomore, and you feel really intimidated about interacting with upper class students. Or maybe you, like, race could be a dynamic when you walk into the room. So maybe the group is predominantly white students and you're a student of color. Or it could be about class, or it could be about the intersection of all of these things. So what are the things that you're also anticipating or observing about your group that could potentially lead to differences of opinion and or conflict?
And I think I think the proactive piece, I think, is the most important piece that you're talking about, like really kind of establishing these things beforehand, because we know conflict is inevitable, conflict can be really good, but if we can talk about beforehand, how are we going to work through these? What are the dynamics of our groups? Using all those things you mentioned, the team toolkit module, also the leading in a diverse community. I think both of those things leading up to this can be really helpful when you think about being the holder sometimes of the conflict that arises in your group that you're leading.
And we're talking about all of this in context to leadership and to student groups, but also this is the type of thing that's really important that you can use in regular life. So, like, Stacy and I have traveled to conferences before, gone on trips together, and because we happen to do this work, we'll say, okay, what's your style around traveling, right? Or what do you need when you go to sleep if we're sharing a hotel room? And that really gives us then the ability to be able to say what we need right ahead of time so that we can anticipate. We have different lifestyles, we have different preferences, we have different needs. How do we stay open and embrace that for each other so that we can enjoy one another and also do what we need to do for ourselves, right?
Yeah, to travel with friends who do this work and to have those conversations is totally normal. To travel with friends who don't do this work and you try to have this conversation, they're like, what? I'm like, trust me, it'll make for a better trip. Okay.
Or, like, you know, I get hangry if I don't eat after a certain amount of time, right? Or, like, if I say I have to stop to pee, like, I need to stop to pee.
Right.
So these are, like, really useful life skills as well as leadership things.
Absolutely. And that's how we know, I think, more of how to do this is because of life stuff we've been through, really.
Right. And your group might travel together, you know, your group might do things like that together. You might have really solid friendships out of that. So this is a really quick worksheet to be able to think through some of these questions when you're creating group norms around conflict. So this is actually a 2-page worksheet that is also included on the Moodle site, and it gives you all of these questions on the first page, and on the second page it allows you to write them in. So this is one of the things that either you can, or we would encourage you do both individually and as a group. So the questions are, what do we want to do when conflict arises? What do we want to do when it comes up? How do we want to address it? What if it involves the leader of the group? How do we want to move on or forward as a group? And what do we need to do to ask for help? So this is one of those things that if you do it independently, after you've taken your conflict style assessment, you might think through, like, these are the things that I need. And so after each person in your organization fills this out, you all can sit down and say together, like, okay, what did you answer for this question? And then what do we agree on as a group? You really want to make sure that it's not, there's consensus around this stuff so that you're all on the same page. And part of that is so that you can refer back when things arise and say, we decided on this as a group. And so if that's not working or we don't feel comfortable with it, what do we need to change? Also, these are just some questions that we have provided for you. If you feel like there are different things that you need to ask of your group or ask of yourself, feel free to amend it. But make sure that you're giving it some intentionality around and that your group really does create some norms around this stuff, and recognize that your group will change and evolve over the course of time. So it might be good to revisit this somewhere around mid-year, mid-semester, just to check in. So the next thing we were talking about in terms of identity, et cetera, like who is in the group, right? But you also need to be thinking about who am I in relationship to others? So it's not just like, what does everybody else bring? It's what do I bring as well? And how will those things interact with the rest of the group? So what identities do you hold? What are the things that are salient to you? How do you feel like you show up in spaces? What are the things that you think people make assumptions about you when you enter spaces, etc.? So for example, I identify as biracial, I present as white. That shows up when I walk into a group, depending on the different racial makeup of a group, right? I identify as cisgender if I'm in a group where there are mixed genders, or I'm in a space where it's primarily the same gender identities. Like those things will play a role in how we interact. Who are you in relationship to the group? Are you new? Are you a returner? Do you have a role? Are you thinking about wanting a role, but you haven't asked for one, or you're not sure? Like, do you need a position to feel like you're valued in the group? What's your status? And do you also have friends that are in the group, or is your roommate in the group, or colleagues, or maybe there's a conflict that you have with somebody outside of the group and you happen to be in the same group together, right? Relationships will flow from different parts of your life at Smith into your groups with other student leaders. We talked about oh, go ahead.
No, you finish your thought.
Nope, I got it.
Okay. I also think about, when I think about our res life staff for this, and what does it mean to be, for example, a white person knocking on a door of a whole bunch of folks of color? And what does that mean as far as power and position in your position and then in your identity? So those are really things like to think through, to talk through with your coworkers and your supervisors, like when we're thinking about what does that mean? Or thinking about folks who work in the campus center, interacting with people all the time that are of different status on campus, different folks from the community, and what does that mean for you as a sophomore, new, worker in the campus center? So like thinking about that, I think is really important, and what happens when conflict arises in those spaces, and where do you fit in with that as well?
Absolutely. We talked a little bit about what your role in the group is, and then how have your identities impacted how you experience conflict? So I had referenced it a little bit about like my identity within my family has impacted the way that I receive or experience or perceive conflict that's either about to occur or is. But there are other, I think, being socialized as a cisgender woman and how I approach conflict with either other women identified folks or not, that comes into play, right? So thinking about like what in your experience or what in your life thus far has led you up to how you engage or disengage around conflict based on your identities. So this next worksheet also talks about like, what are the things that you need to know about yourself? And this might be something that you do before the previous worksheet that we listed, just because it will give you some pause to think of, like, to really reflect on who are you, how do you show up, etc. So some of these questions are, what salient identities do I hold that impact how I deal with conflict? What do I want the group to know about me in conflict? This is how I prefer to address conflict. And this is how I want others to address me around conflict. And some of these questions are really about trying to give you some agency in terms of how you communicate with others, who you are, and what you need. And these can potentially be high-risk questions depending on how, your relationship to the group. If you're new, if you're just starting out, you might want to wait a little bit until you've established some relationship or some bonding with your groups. But I really encourage you to be as honest as possible. Sometimes we want to communicate things with others that we think they want to hear and that are not necessarily true, right? So it might be easy to say, I'm really open to having direct feedback. But when you receive it, and if you're the type of person that needs to reflect or think about it, say that. So I think it's important to be able to say to a group, I want direct feedback, but I don't want it in front of everybody else. I need time to process it. Then I either want to follow up about it or I don't. So just think through like how that best will set you and other people up for success. And you don't have to sugarcoat it. You don't have to say what you think others want to hear about conflict. Be honest, because if you're able to really articulate what it is that you need, people will do that. They'll honor that. And that might change over time, right? Depending on how you feel with the group, depending on what the feedback is or what the issue is, it might be okay. Maybe you've established something in your group's culture about calling something out if it's about a certain type of thing. And then that might be something that you revisit and say like, oh, okay, right. Like that feels like a conflict with me, but we've established that as a group norm. Anything you want to add, Cece?
No, I think that's good. And I think it really is about like you said, these may be super personal, but figuring out how to share them in an effort to support you in your role and also to support the people or the org or the group that you're leading. So I think it is important to really talk through these things to be able to best move through any conflict that could arise.
Great. So this is again where we'd encourage you to pause the video. And if you're doing this with your group or you're watching this together, to take those worksheets that we mentioned and either write in the worksheets or write in a journal or a post-it note or scrap piece of paper, whatever, some thoughts, quick reflections on what identities do you hold, what identities that you know of are present in the group. Try not to make assumptions. Do this based on what people have communicated. What identities might be missing from the group, and how do those identities impact how each person might communicate and or experience conflict differently? All right, so we're going to move on.
And so we've said kind of over and over again that we see conflict as positive. So it's really important for us to think about what is the difference between productive conflict and unhealthy conflict. And when I think about productive conflict, I think about, and we put it here as an example, but this difference of opinion in an approach, right? So I may have a strong opinion on how to move forward with a certain, like this presentation, for example. Annie and I were working on this presentation. I maybe had a strong opinion that we need to include that video that we included, and maybe Annie didn't think so originally, then Annie saw it and was like, oh my goodness, you're right, we should include this video, right? So we had this conflict. This is a really like minuscule conflict we didn't actually have, but we had this conflict. I presented this new information. I presented this alternative to doing things the way we were going to do things, and that really became productive because we could talk through some differences or some different opinions. Where conflict becomes unhealthy is when it becomes more on the interpersonal, right? Like, Stacy, I don't like your hair today, so I don't want to do that video. Oh, again, that's super like pulling it down. That's often not how you're going to see conflict, but it's really something that's not productive. It really is. It becomes more on the interpersonal. If you have issues with somebody, so if I and I've been in work teams where I maybe have had a conflict with somebody outside of work, and then inside, when we come back and we're sitting around a table trying to be productive when it comes to a work task, we really need to think about, do we need to work through that conflict separate, or can we put it to the side and come together and move through what we need to do for work? And I think that's the important key, is thinking about like, is this impacting the work that we're going to do together? If it is, then we need to address it. We probably don't need to address it sitting around a table with other folks who we're working with, but we should address it if it's going to impact the work that we're doing together. If it's not, then I would say it could grow to be unhealthy, but how do we separate it from the work and the goals of our team, our organization, our staff, whatnot? Annie, do you have any other thoughts on that?
No, I mean, I think that you really hit it. And I think what's important to remember is that because even with being in a virtual environment right now, there are pre-existing relationships that people have, right? Or if you're new to Smith, you're going to have different interactions in terms of being in class with somebody. So if we were on campus, because it's a residential community, there are housing things that can come up. So maybe you live with somebody that you're also in a group with, or maybe you had an argument in class, or maybe you worked together in the library and this person showed up late for their shift, right? Like, relationships will overlap, and that's likely to happen because you're living, learning, and working at the same place. Even virtually, sometimes it's like somebody didn't sign on to the meeting at the time that they were supposed to, or they didn't pull their weight in a group project, and now you have to see them in your a cappella group, right? So it's sometimes those things, it's very likely that they will overlap. And to really think about what Stacy said, can we compartmentalize this, or is this taking up so much space that it's going to bring people in? So we had talked a little bit before about like, how do you create group norms and culture around conflict? And we want you to be thinking about some of these tips as guiding questions or guiding principles. So when you're thinking about what types of things you need in your group to create a culture that embraces conflict, we want you to get curious. When we make assumptions about what other people need, who they are, how they approach things, what their intentions are, we run into problems already. So instead of making an assumption, get curious and ask yourself, is the story I'm telling myself true? Or how do I question the story I'm telling myself about this situation or this person? And so really encourage each other to be able to think through, like, is the conflict that we think we're experiencing or we are experiencing something that is actually happening? What does getting curious for our group mean? How do you reframe conflict as necessary for change? Conflict is going to happen inevitably when you're working with people, you're living with people, you're learning with people. Differences in styles, approaches, how we learn, how we negotiate, how we communicate all will exist. And that's what makes a culture really rich, right? Like we don't all want to think the same. We don't all want to communicate the same. If Stacy and I had the same exact approach for this presentation, it might be really dull. So the fact that we have differences in what we think is interesting or important brings a richness. And so if you can think about reframing that as something that really enhances your group and will allow for your group to evolve, then you start to shift the mindset around conflict as being something to avoid and something to not be a good thing for your group. Name it and address it. When there's a conflict that's lingering, the elephant in the room is named an elephant because it takes up so much space, right? So if there's a way for your group to be able to think through, either we're going to have like a physical stuffed elephant or like a little toy or something that we actually do in the Wordle Center. We have some fun props to be able to say, if it's too hard to say out loud, I'm just going to put it out here and say, okay, I don't know how to say it right now, but there is something that's going on in this group. And so maybe that's a ritual that you establish with your group where you like flash a picture of an elephant on your screen, or say, I'm the person in the group that's just going to name it, like something is going down, what's happening. But once you do that, it lets go of some of the power around the conflict. And it then becomes something that becomes more accessible to be able to approach, rather than this thing that feels like it has control over everybody.
Can I add something to that?
Yeah.
I really, really like what you said about like having a physical thing to be able to like name it, because it's hard. Sometimes it's really hard. Like it takes courage to be able to like say like there's something going on and we need to talk about it. Especially like it's hard for us, for you as leaders, and I think it's hard like as your members or your house or your group to also to be able to name that as well. So to have, I really like that idea, to have something where anybody can be like, here, I don't know what to say about it, but I think that could start really positive and productive conversation. So I think that's a really great thing to think about.
Cool. Making proposals means like, how do you want to have different suggestions about how to address things? And how do you potentially want to, like some conflicts might feel different than others. So you can think through as a group, like, how do we want to address stuff around accountability versus how do we want to address stuff around identity dynamics versus XYZ? Make up what feels right for your group. Stacy had mentioned in one of the previous slides too, don't make what isn't personal. So if I don't like the Coco video that we've decided, but I've, sucked it up and just said, fine, whatever, rolled my eyes, moved on. And then when Stacy and I go to hang out and I'm like, I don't like you, and I've got an attitude because I didn't like the Coco video, I'm making something that's irrelevant to our friendship now present because I didn't communicate what I needed before. So when we do that, we then introduce these different dynamics that make things about people and not about our ideas or about actions or about impressions, right? We really want to try to keep those separate. And then
I need it to be known that Annie loves
I do love Coco. And that's not to say I wouldn't have chosen maybe a different video, but we had a good conversation about what kind of representation we wanted in the video, what are common things, we talked through it, so that actually is a legitimate example of how we negotiated, right? And then make the conscious decision to move on. if you let something linger and sit, it's just going to be part of your culture and your environment from the time it happens to the time you decide to leave campus, right? So find some way of having closure around a conflict, both for yourself and for your group. Any other things you want to add?
No, I think again, conflict doesn't need to be scary. We think conflict is really important and necessary and can be super productive. And you're not in this alone. You have advisors, you have supervisors, you've got peers, you've got all different folks who can help you and assist you when conflict happens, that it may be at a point where it's beyond what you can, I don't want to say can handle, but it's beyond what you should be handling, really is what it is, and that there are other folks. So we're going to say, remember your resources. And on this next slide, you will see a worksheet, because we love our worksheets, on who are your conflict resources. So this is to get you thinking about what offices, other student leaders, friends and peers, like maybe you have a friend who's like your person, right? And so you're like, all right, I know that I can process this thing anonymously with them. They're not going to ask me like a lot of questions about who all these people are. It's not about gossip, but it really is about helping you kind of process through. And what other resources? And really wanting you to remember that you're never alone in managing conflict as you are a leader. There are so many people and resources on this campus to help support you. So this worksheet, along with all the other ones we've been talking about, will also, excuse me, be available on Moodle as well. And if you click to the next slide, we're going to have you again pause the video and take just a couple of minutes to refer to the previous slide and jot down who are these who are your conflict resources, who are the people, who are the offices, who are the departments that you can go to when conflict arises.
I think the other thing to keep in mind is that while we're doing this in the context of leadership and maybe conflict with peers, you might have a conflict with your advisor. You might have a conflict with your supervisor. You might have a conflict. And when we say you, it could be individually or your group.
Yep.
With, a faculty member. But know that people want you to be able to move through it. And so if it's somebody that has power or is in a position of power, like a supervisor and an advisor, there are other adults or other, like adult resources, departments, etc., to help you navigate that. And we're hoping that you'll also have conversations, not just with your group, but also with your advisors about if something goes down and you don't like the decision that your supervisor made, how do you have conversations around that? Because that's going to be important in terms of maintaining those relationships as much as it is peer-to-peer.
Excellent point.
So we're wrapping this up. We want you to know that there's a bunch of different ways that you can utilize us or utilize this resource going forward. We're just gonna skim through this really, really fast. You can watch this video. Maybe you are watching this video with others in your group. Maybe you're watching it on your own. You can decide that if you are a leader of your organization and you want other people to watch this, that you send it to them and have everybody fill out their worksheets on their own or do things at their own pace. Or you can assign any or all of the exercises to your teams, then say that you're going to do a follow-up at a retreat or a meeting or however. Or if you want, I would say one of us, but I'm going to say because I'm about to have a baby, that you follow up and say, I'd love you to be able to work with our group specifically around some of these things. And I would say, knowing Stacy for quite a while, she'll be perfectly happy to be able to figure out what works best for her and your group in terms of how you want to navigate that. So know that, like, just because we have these resources on Moodle doesn't mean that you're doing it on your own. We're here to help guide you however we can in the process of utilizing this.
Mhm. Yeah, I would emphasize everything that Annie said, and especially around using these different. We gave you, I think, 3 or 4 different worksheets, things to look at, and I think that we'd like you all to kind of go through them. But as you're thinking about the students that you work with, what works, what can be most useful for your group of your constituents, essentially, and what would be most meaningful and helpful, and like Annie said, I would be happy to facilitate these exercises with folks, talk you through as a leader on how to facilitate with your group as well. I would do that.
And we know that like doing all of this stuff virtually is not ideal. Hopefully you'll be able to use this learning module once you're back physically on campus as well. But feel free to ask us questions about how do we navigate this stuff in a virtual environment.
Mhm.
Because everything is a bit wonky, right?
Mhm.
So trying to figure out like how do we have conversations or productive meetings or productive relationships when everything is over technology, and some people have differing access to technology, or sometimes technology fails, like can be really challenging, and that can present a conflict in and of itself. So let us help you through that.
Mhm.
And here's our contact info. Find us on the Smith website. We're both happy to point you in other directions for resources, etc., if you need. So thanks for sticking with us.
Yeah, thank you. Have productive conflict.